The bread was the last of it. Not the last of the loaf. The last of the flour, the last of the lard, the last of anything she could call a meal in the house on the ridge above Calloway Creek. Clara Voss knew that when she wrapped it in the cloth and carried it out into the January cold, she was not giving away a portion of something. She was giving away everything. She did it anyway. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. The man had come off the trail 3 days before Christmas, on foot, which told her everything before she got within 20 yards of him. Men on the Texas high plains did not walk in January unless their horse was dead or stolen, and the way this one moved, one shoulder dropping with every step, his coat torn open at the side and dark with something that had soaked through and dried and soaked again. She understood the horse was probably the least of his problems. She had stood at the door of the house she and her late husband Ellis had built in the first year of their marriage and watched him come up the low hill in the gray afternoon light. And she had felt the particular calculation of a woman alone in a place where being wrong about a stranger could mean everything. She let him in. His name was Thomas Aldridge, and he was 43 years old, which she would not have guessed from looking at him in those first days. He was a cattleman out of the Pecos country who had been riding the line for a ranch he no longer worked, because the ranch had gone under in September when the owner lost his deed to a bank in San Antonio, and the 30 men who had worked it had scattered like seeds from a broken pod. He had been 3 weeks on the trail in weather that had no business being survived, and the wound in his side was from a man he had not known was following him until the man stopped following and started shooting, somewhere in the Caprock country east of Lubbock, for reasons that had never been entirely explained. Clara fed him what she had. She did not think about what came after. There was a calculus she had learned in the years since Ellis died, a way of dividing the present from the future and dealing with each in its own time, and she applied it now the way she applied it to everything. The man needed food and warmth. He needed the wound cleaned and bound. He needed sleep that was not the sleep of cold and blood loss on open ground. She gave him those things. What came after would come after. He was out of the worst of it by the 3rd day. Still weak, still pale, still moving with the careful deliberation of a man whose body had been reminded of its limits. But present, clear-eyed. He sat at the table and ate what she put in front of him and did not pretend that it was more than it was, and she respected him for that. Some people, when they had been helped, dressed the help up to make themselves feel less beholden. Thomas Aldridge looked at the thin soup and the small portion of bread and said thank you plainly, and she understood from the way he said it that he knew the cost of what she had given. On the 4th morning, she came in from the barn to find him standing at the window facing the yard. He had dressed himself, which had taken him a while. She could tell from the way the buttons sat. He was looking at the place in the same way she sometimes looked at it in the early light, taking its measure. The pole fence along the east side that needed 3 sections replaced. The barn roof with its loose boards on the north face. The garden plot under its thin snow, resting, but nothing planted yet for spring because she had not been certain she could afford seed. You're alone here, he said. Not as a question. Since March, she said. He turned from the window. He had a face that had been shaped by outdoor work and weather into something angular and still, the kind of face that did not give away much by default. But she had been watching him for 4 days, and she had learned to read the smaller things. The way he held the window frame. The way he had thanked her for the soup. Your husband, he said. Ellis. Spring fever took him quick. She said it the way she said everything about Ellis now, directly and without embellishment, because embellishment did not honor him and it did not help her. Thomas Aldridge was quiet for a moment. The fence along the east needs work, he said. I know it, she said. I can do it before I ride. She looked at him. He was still pale. He was holding the window frame more for balance than from habit. You can't work fence yet, she said. Not today, he agreed. But in a week, maybe less. She poured the coffee and set a cup in front of him and sat down across the table. Outside, the January wind moved through the pole fence and made the sound it always made, the low, tuneless sound of winter doing its patient work on everything. "You don't owe me the fence," she said. "I know that," he said. He stayed. Not because she asked him. Not because she made any arrangement or extended any particular welcome beyond the practical. He simply did not leave, and she found, after the first several days, that she had stopped expecting him to. He fixed the fence sections along the east. He replaced the boards on the north face of the barn roof, working slowly at first, his side still pulling when he reached, but steadily. He split wood for 2 days straight when the weather turned harder in the second week of January, stacking it under the lean-to with a methodical care that told her he understood what a winter would supply meant to a house that could not afford to run out. He did not speak much. Neither did she. They had arrived, without discussion, at a kind of working quiet that did not feel like absence. It felt like two people who had each been alone long enough to know the difference between silence that is empty and silence that has something in it. There were evenings when she noticed him reading. He kept a small Bible in the breast pocket of his coat, worn soft at the spine, the kind of book that has been opened and closed so many times it falls to the same page on its own. He did not read aloud, and he did not speak about what he was reading. He simply sat near the lamp after the work was done and read in the quiet way of a man who has made a habit of it, and she recognized the habit from Ellis, who had read the same way, and she let it be what it was without comment. He asked her once about the garden plot, what she had grown the previous year, and what the yield had been, and whether the soil was heavy with clay or something more cooperative. She told him about the summer squash and the pole beans and the pores showing from the corn because July had been dry, and he listened with the attention of a man who understood what she was describing, who knew the relationship between rainfall and root depth and the particular disappointment of a corn row that stops at knee height when it should have gone to your shoulder. He asked whether the well held through August. She told him it had, barely, and he nodded and looked out the window at the frozen garden plot and said nothing further, but she understood that he had been calculating something, the way people who work land calculate constantly, always 3 seasons ahead of the present moment. The injuries slowed him less as the weeks passed. By the 3rd week of January, he was moving without the guarded deliberation of the early days, and she watched it change the way you watch a field coming back from drought. Not all at once, but in daily increments too small to name, until one morning you look up, and the thing is different, and you are not sure exactly when it changed. He was not a man who complained about pain. She suspected he would not have complained about considerably worse. His sons arrived on a Saturday. There had been no warning, no letter, because there had been no address to send one to. She was in the kitchen when she heard the horses, more than one, and when she stepped to the door, she saw them coming up the hill in the low gray morning, for riders, and then a 5th behind them on a bay with a white face, and then a 6th at the rear. 6 of them. They were all large men, the way Thomas was large, the particular scale that comes from a life of outdoor work rather than from birth, and they sat their horses the same way, with the relaxed authority of people who have been in the saddle so long it has become their natural posture. The eldest was perhaps 35. The youngest, still carrying some of the unfinished quality of a young man who had not yet grown entirely into his own face, could not have been more than 17. Thomas came out of the barn when he heard them. The reunion was not loud. None of them shouted. The eldest dismounted first and shook his father's hand, and then pulled him into his arms with the grip of a man who had been afraid and was no longer, and the others dismounted in order and came forward, and Clara stood at the door and watched the 6 of them surround their father in the January morning and felt something she had no immediate word for. Thomas turned toward the house with his eldest son still at his shoulder and called to her, "Clara, these are my boys." She came out into the cold and stood before them, and they looked at her the way men look at someone they owe a debt they cannot yet measure. The eldest, whose name was Harlan, took off his hat. The others followed without any word being passed between them. "Ma'am," Harlan said, "he told us what you did." She looked at Thomas. "I told them you kept me alive," he said. She did not know what to say to that, so she said what was practical. "You've ridden a long way, coming out of the cold." The house was not built for 7 people. There was barely room to stand, and the table sat for with trouble. But they came in, and she made coffee, and there was not enough of anything except the fact of warmth and proximity, and somehow that was sufficient. The 6 sons arranged themselves with the unconscious coordination of people who had shared small spaces their whole lives, some sitting, some standing, and they drank their coffee in the particular manner of men who have been in the saddle since before first light and have learned to be grateful for warmth in a cup. None of them made her feel crowded out of her own kitchen. That was the first thing she noted and filed away. Large men in small spaces either filled the space with themselves or they didn't, and these men, all 6 of them, moved with a kind of practiced consideration she had not expected. They kept their elbows in. They asked before they refilled from the pot. When Cobb knocked his cup against the edge of the shelf and caught it before it fell, he looked at her first before he looked at the cup, the reflexive accountability of someone raised to be aware of the things around him. She learned their names. Harlan was the eldest, steady and measured in everything. Then Cobb, who had a laugh that arrived without warning and a way of taking up space that was not aggressive, but simply very present. Then Rafe, who was quiet in the manner of someone thinking continuously. Then the twins, Dale and Owen, who finished each other's sentences not as a performance, but from genuine habit. And finally the youngest, whose name was Percy and who was watching her with the open appraisal of someone who had not yet learned to disguise his curiosity. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. They had ridden 11 days to find him. After the Pecos ranch folded and the men scattered, there had been 2 months of no word, which for Thomas Aldridge was not unusual, because he was a man who did not write letters and never had. But when December came with its particular cold and still no word, Harlan had put the brothers together, and they had ridden the line of towns and trading posts and lined shacks along the route their father would most likely have traveled, asking at each one, until a man in a settlement east of Lubbock told them about the shooting and pointed them south and west toward the Caprock country. They had not known, when they came over that last ridge in the January morning, whether what they were riding toward was their father or his grave. That evening, after supper, Clara went out to the barn to check on the horses, not from need, but from the habit of solitude, the small retreat that had become necessary after a day of more people than her house had held in 3 years. She stood in the warmth of the barn with the animals breathing softly around her and thought about what came next. They would leave. That was the reasonable expectation. Thomas was healed enough to ride now, or would be in another week, and his sons had come to bring him home, and home for him was somewhere else, somewhere north and west, back to the Pecos country or further still. She had known that when she let him in. She had not built anything on what was temporary. She heard the barn door and turned to find Thomas standing in the frame. He came in without speaking and leaned against the post beside the nearest stall and looked at his hands for a moment. He had the particular way of collecting himself before he spoke that she had learned to read as meaning what came next mattered to him. "Harlan wants to know about your situation," he said. "My situation," she repeated. "The place. How you're managing." She was quiet for a moment. "I'm managing," she said. "Clara." He said her name the way he'd been saying it since the first week, without any particular weight, but with a kind of attention that was different from how strangers said your name. "I know what the flower situation is. I know what the fence situation is. I know what a winter on this ridge looks like for one person with no income past spring. She looked at him directly. What are you saying? He was quiet for a moment. Then he said it plainly, in the manner she had come to understand was simply how he was. We don't have a place anymore. The Pecos outfit is gone. Harlan's been running a small operation up near Tascosa, but it's not enough for 6 men and a future. This land is good land. Better than I've seen in years, if someone put real work to it. Ellis's land, she said. Your land, he said. I'm not talking about taking anything. I'm talking about building something. She stood in the barn in the January cold with the horses breathing around her and looked at a man who had walked up her hill in December with a wound in his side and nothing else, and who had spent 3 weeks repaying a debt she had never asked him to repay, and who was now standing in her barn saying what she had not expected anyone to say to her again. 6 sons, she said, and a father who knows how to work, he said. She looked away, at the wall of the barn, at the boards he had replaced on the roof, at the work of his hands that was already in this place. This is not a small thing you're proposing, she said. No, he agreed. It's not. She came back inside later and found the 6 brothers arranged around the kitchen in the lamplight, some playing cards, some mending something. Percy asleep against the wall with his hat over his face. They looked up when she came in, all 6 of them at once, and in that moment she understood something she had not allowed herself to understand before. They had ridden 11 days for their father. They had come into her house and eaten her food and taken up all the available space and done it without a single moment of the particular entitlement that men who believed themselves owed something carried into rooms. They had taken their hats off. They had said thank you. Harlan had washed the supper dishes without being asked, and she had not known what to do with that at the time. She did not give Thomas an answer that night. She had not built the habit of quick decisions. Ellis had called it her stillness, and she had called it thinking, and they had both been right. She thought about it for 2 days, moving through the ordinary work of the morning and the afternoon, and she let it be what it was, a large thing, and she gave it the room it needed. On the 3rd morning, she found Harlan at the pole fence along the south side, replacing a section that had not yet failed but was close to failing. He had not been asked. He was just there, in the early light, doing the work that needed doing before it became worse work. She stood at the fence and watched him for a moment. Your father told you what he proposed, she said. Harlan set down the post and looked at her with his father's directness. He did, he said. What do you think of it? He considered the question the way the Aldridge men considered most things, without hurry. I think this is good land, he said. I think you're a person who works it right. I think my father hasn't looked at anything the way he looks at this place in a long time. He paused. And I think he hasn't looked at anyone the way he looks at you since our mother. She was quiet. We're not a small thing to take on, he said. I know that. But we know how to work. And we don't leave. The people we're tied to. She looked at the fence. At the work already done in 3 weeks by a man who owed her nothing. No, she said. I've seen that. Spring came to the ridge above Calloway Creek the way it always came to that country, arguing with winter for most of March before finally establishing itself in the first week of April, when the grass came in thin and new along the south slopes, and the garden plot broke open under the first real warmth. Clara planted the seed she had been able to afford, which was more than she had expected to afford because Harlan had ridden to the settlement in late February and come back with supplies that she had not asked for, and that had been paid for by the pooling of what the Aldridge brothers had between them, which was not much, but was more than nothing. Thomas asked her to marry him on a Tuesday morning in March, standing at the east fence in the particular light of that month, when the sky is clear and cold and the land still shows its winter gray, but something in the air has changed. He asked her directly, the way he did everything, with no performance and no particular speech. He asked her if she thought she could build something with him and his sons on this land, and whether she would be willing to do it as his wife. She said yes, not without thought, not without the particular weight of what she was accepting. 6 sons and a man she had known 4 months, and a future that was not guaranteed by anything except the quality of the people making it. She said yes because she had watched Thomas Aldridge work in January cold with a healing wound and never complain. She said yes because Harlan had replaced the fence section before it failed. She said yes because Percy, the youngest, 17 and still unfinished, had come to her 3 weeks after his arrival and asked quietly if she would teach him to make biscuits the way she made them. And she had taught him, and he had been patient and attentive and had gotten flour on everything including himself, and that had made her laugh for the first time since March. She said yes because Ellis had been a good man and she had loved him, and loving a good man did not make her incapable of it again. It had made her better at recognizing it. The wedding was small. A circuit preacher who came through Calloway Creek in April and performed the service in the yard in the good morning light, with the 6 Aldridge sons standing in a row and the land running out in all directions around them. The land that was hers and was now theirs. The land that was beginning, in the slow way of land that is properly worked, to show what it could become. The settlement heard about it the way settlements heard about everything, through the particular transmission of a place where people paid attention to other people's business out of habit and necessity. Some of them had known about the widow on the ridge and her difficult winter, and some of them had heard the Aldridge name from the Pecos country, and some of them had expected nothing from either. What they had not expected was the scale of what the Aldridge family put to work on that land in the spring and summer of that year. There had been a man in the settlement, a storekeeper named Burden, who had extended Clara credit through the previous fall in the cautious way of a man who doubted the account would be settled, but who had not yet decided to say so openly. He had watched her come in each month with less and leave with less, and he had made his own calculations about the Ridge property and what would become of it by spring. He was not a cruel man. He was simply a practical one who had seen the math before and knew how it usually ended. He was in his store on the morning of the first Saturday in April when Harlan Aldridge came in with a list and paid it in coin, the full account, every cent that had been carried forward since October, and then bought 2 months of supplies on top of it, seed and salt and flour and tools, paying as he went from a leather purse that was not fat, but was honest. Burden had made change without comment, but she heard about it from 3 different people before the week was out. News of a debt paid in full traveled in a settlement the way most news traveled, fast and with footnotes. She did not go to Burden's store for 3 weeks after that, and when she did, he met her with a different manner than he had used before. Not warmer, exactly. More careful. The way people adjust when they have revised their estimate of someone. 6 men who knew cattle and knew land, and knew what a place needed if you meant to keep it. The pole fences rebuilt properly along all 4 sides. The barn roof replaced entirely in May, working from first light to last, and when they were finished it was a different structure, tight and weatherproof, the kind that held. A second garden plot broken east of the first one in June, twice the yield by July. 3 Hereford cattle purchased from a man in the next county who was moving north and selling his smaller animals. The beginning of something modest that they intended to make larger. Clara worked alongside them. She had never been a woman who stood to the side of things, and the Aldridge men had understood that within the first week without being told. She planted and hoed and helped with the cattle in the early mornings and managed the household with the same particular order she had always managed it. And the difference was that the household was no longer a single person maintaining a structure that kept threatening to require more than one set of hands. There were mornings when she stood at the kitchen door in the early light and watched the boys go out to their work and felt the particular, complicated quality of a life that had not gone the way she planned and had become something she had not been able to plan. Ellis was in the ground in the small plot east of the house, and she went to that place on Sundays still, and she talked to him there the way she always had, about the land and the season and what was growing and what needed doing. She told him about Thomas. She told him about the 6 sons and the fence and the biscuit lesson and the wedding in the April light. She told him she believed he would have recognized good men when he saw them. She believed he would have. The summer ran long and hot the way summers in that country always ran, and the work was hard the way hard work is when you are building something rather than maintaining something, when every day ends with something visible that was not there in the morning. By fall there was enough hay laid in for the cattle and the horses and the spring to follow. By fall the east fence was sound, and the south garden had given more than she had planted it to give, and the barn held everything that needed holding. On an evening in October, when the air had that particular sharpness that comes before the first real cold, and the light went sideways across the ridge in the long gold way of autumn, Clara sat on the porch step and watched Thomas mend a bridle in the yard, while Percy practiced something on a harmonica he had acquired somewhere. 3 sad phrases, patient and searching, drifting across the quiet evening towards something they had not yet found the words for. Rafe came and sat on the step beside her without ceremony, the way the quieter Aldridge men did things, arriving without announcement and staying without explanation. He had a piece of harness leather in his hands that he was working with a small knife, cleaning the crease, the same unhurried motion he applied to most things. They sat together for a while without speaking, which was ordinary between them by now. "You ever think about leaving?" he said finally. Not with any particular weight. Just the question, set down the way you set down a tool you have been carrying a while. She thought about it. "When Ellis died," she said. "I thought about it then. My sister was in Kansas. There was family there. It would have been the reasonable thing. But you stayed. The land was ours," she said. "His and mine together. Leaving felt like losing the second half of it." Rafe was quiet, working the leather. "Pa feels that," he said, "about this place. I've seen him look at land his whole life. He's never looked at any of it the way he looks at this." She watched Thomas in the yard, his hands moving over the bridle with the steady patience of a man who has learned that most things worth having require more time than you think they will. "He looks at you the same way," Rafe said. He said it without looking up from the leather, plainly, the way the Aldridge men said true things, as if they had simply noticed a fact and saw no reason not to mention it. She did not answer, but she did not need to. Thomas looked up from the bridle and caught her watching him. "All right," he said. "All right," she said. Harlan came out of the barn and stood at the fence for a moment, looking at the land in the evening light the way men who work land look at it, the particular combination of assessment and something that is not quite love but lives near it. Cobb was behind him, then Rafe, then Dale and Owen together, as always. 6 of them at the fence in the October evening. Her stepsons, her family, the 6 men who had ridden 11 days for their father and had stayed for the work and the place and something else that none of them had named, because naming things in that country was considered unnecessary if you were already doing them. She had given her last bread to a dying cowboy on a December morning because the calculation of withholding it had not seemed like the kind of calculation she wanted to make. She had not known what would follow. She had not known about the 6 sons, or the April wedding, or the October evening with the harmonica drifting across the fence line into the first cold of fall. She had just known the man was dying, and she had the bread, and that was the whole of the math. The rest had come from what the Aldridge family knew about debts and how they were paid, which was not in coin and not an obligation, but in the only currency that actually held its value on the high plains in January, in October, in all the seasons of a life honestly lived. They paid it in work. They paid it in staying. And on that porch in the long October light, with the smell of wood smoke beginning and the harmonica finding its slow way forward and Thomas Aldridge looking at her across the yard, with the steady certainty of a man who has come home after a long time not having one. Clara Voss, Clara Aldridge, understood that what she had given away on a December morning had not been lost. It had been planted, and now, in the way of good seed and good ground worked by people who understood what they were building, it had come back to her beyond all accounting. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.